Welcome to WTF Fantasy Football Gym Day, and guess who's back? Brian. Brian, we were wondering if maybe you were part of the Drake's Cakes family, you were part of the Hostess family. Where were you last week? Were you counting your millions?
Everyone hates the Drake, and after a massive week in DFS, I had a angry mob outside my house, and they all wanted their piece of the $11 I won. So I had to take the night off. I'm sorry, guys.
And of course, we got Jim Day back this week. Jim, last week one of the topics we discussed was does Las Vegas control the NFL? And I got to ask you about Las Vegas. I watched a lot of football this year. And I know they're the New England Patriots. How are they favored over the Kansas City Chiefs this week?
Well, because Brady's coming back, he's starting to play a little better, but and they're home, so that's why they're favored.
Who do you like?
Ooh, New England is too good at taking away your best offensive weapon. I think that's what they do this week. I think they take Tyreek Hill out of the mix again. I think it's going to come down to Hunt and Mahomes having to work special magic. So I think I'm going to take New England in this one, but it's tight. And I can't believe you asked me not to start the damn show. Put me on the spot right away. Love it.
right away. Brian, who do you like? Kansas City or New England in New England Sunday Night Football?
Well, I think everyone forgets how bad the New England defense has been this year. We're kind of all thinking, oh, they had one good game. Everything's back, and right with the world. Because the TV commentators say so. I still don't trust Kansas City's defense for anything. But until somebody slows those weapons down, I mean, how can you go against Kansas City? I'd love to see Brady just throttle them because I hate when the team gets too high like Kansas City. But until they can stop them, I'm going to take Kansas City. They're going to keep the ball rolling.
All right.
I like a counter to that real quick, though. KC's defense is by far much worse than New England's.
They both are terrible. Neither of these defenses are good.
New England is, they're not great, but they're not terrible. They're definitely not terrible against the run. 13th against opposing running backs in PPR points allowed per game. So, it's not too easy to run on them. They've only given up 2 touchdowns to the running backs through 5 games. Where they can be beat is through the air, which we know KC can do. And that's why I think KC, make sure they put the focus on Hill to take those big plays out.
Jim, I hate to say this, but those numbers are a little distorted because the Patriots being in the lead. The Detroit Lions had the first time ever running back run for 100 yards against New England Patriots in 4 years. Kareem Hunt is the play in DFS this week, and he will rush for 5 yards a carry.
Well, I bet. Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
He'll be really low owned too, I bet. So that's a nice play.
Absolutely. I think Kansas City beats them. I just don't think it's the same team. And I actually like them getting to the passer. And I like Mahomes, playing in Foxborough. But Mahomes went into Denver and played a night game in Denver and put up 3 touchdown passes. But I think Kareem Hunt, people will sleep on Sunday night. And he, like I said, 5 yards a carry against the New England defense.
No, that's a good call. I'm interested to see the guys that nobody ever talks about and how they show up in this game. And that's the linebackers of the Patriots, how they can cover. I want to see what they can do against Travis Kelce. I want to see these corners. I want to see the secondary come together. We know they can take out one guy, but this team has Sammy Watkins. They've got Travis Kelce. They can bring out Hunt from the backfield. They've got a lot of weapons, and there's not a lot of great playmakers in that New England secondary. So I think that's going to get exposed. And we know Andy Reid can always dial up, at least one good game a year until he forgets about his running back and they lose 6 out of the next 8.
all very valid points. But Tom Brady playing at home, I got to like that against a defense that hasn't stopped anybody yet. I expect Gronk to finally eat this week. Finally have that big game we've been waiting for. I still think I like New England better at home.
For everybody listening to the podcast, you can catch us every Wednesday night live on YouTube. You can watch the show as well as listen to the show. So I'll ask the chat room, who does better Sunday night? And then I'll ask Jim and I'll ask Brian, Rob Gronkowski or Travis Kelce. Who gets off for more fantasy points? Jim, you go with Gronk or Kelce in the matchup?
I'm going to go with Gronk. Like I said, I think this is the game that he gets over the top of. Kansas City hasn't been able to stop any tight ends. Heck, they haven't stopped pretty much anybody, and that's why they have to keep throwing. I think that trend continues. I do like Kelsey. I think Kelsey has a big game as well, but I'm going to go with Gronk in this one.
Brian, who do you like?
Well, boy, I think they're both going to have great games. And, Ron Parker was a guy last year who was actually doing a lot of the covering for Kansas City on the tight ends. And I think he's a little banged up now. Boy, that's you know what? Play either one of them. I think they're both going to go for over 100 and score. So it's going to be a fantasy bonanza. You can't go wrong with either one.
Big game Sunday night. That's what we're all fired up about. And what we're all fired up about is a little fact or fiction. And one of the things was Monday Night Football. We just watched the New Orleans Saints throttle the Washington Redskins. But Mark Ingram was back. Tony Cincotta had him in his lineup. And I was very excited. And I got some pesos if I ever go to Mexico now. But the question is, Mr. Jim Day, Alvin Kamara owners, are they in a little trouble now that we see Mark Ingram back? Fact or fiction?
Total fiction. Kamara owners are fine. You know what it looked like to me? It almost looked like New Orleans was trotting Mark Ingram out there to see if they could trade him before the deadline, seeing as he's a free agent next year. They don't get nothing for him if he just leaves the team. Why not trade him now when they have Kamara playing at such a high level? It almost looked like they were just putting him front and center to see if anybody could bite at that.
That's a great point, and
Brian,
that's exactly what I was going to say.
Go ahead, Brian.
You would say that?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And being an Eagles fan, that's a guy who I think that the Eagles might be looking at. But also look at the numbers that Kamara has been putting up over the past or the first 4 weeks of the season. So you get to week 5. They're on bye this week. So it's kind of almost like a 2-week bye where you can kind of just pump the brakes a little bit, give the guy a rest and run Ingram into the ground. Like you said, he's not going to be back next year. Who cares?
So I think there's no way he gets traded. I saw an interview with Sean Payton before that game, and that's what led me to believe that he would have a good game and he would actually get a lot of work, is that Payton knew that Kamara was getting way too much work, and he said he needed the guy back because Alvin Kamara would have never lasted the 16 games. We saw the situation with Leonard Fournette. I think Alvin Kamara got a bye week last week while playing that game, and Mark Ingram took all the work. And, Jim, that was the first time ever that I saw Ingram in New Orleans. Actually, I felt some love for Coach Payton for him.
Well, there you go. Yeah, I don't know. There was so much love in that stadium this week because of Drew Brees going for the records that, it was hard to not pick New Orleans in that game. Not, even with the high point spread, it just looked too good with everything going on with, you knew Brees was going to break the record. And, I was really surprised they didn't go for the 500 touchdowns as well that game instead of letting Hill run that last touchdown in. Why not give them the 500 touchdowns while they're at home instead of having them do it while they're on the road?
Well, Brian, if you play DFS, there's a guy that comes out every week that everybody jumps on because he's cheap, and a lot of times it doesn't come through. And this week it was Marquez Valdes-Scantling. And I almost said Scalding because he was hot as a pistol. Brian, is this the guy that's no longer a guy that we are going to call cheap, and he's going to be the guy we're to throw in? Is he going to be an every week thing going forward?
No, he's not going to be an every week thing. People think, because Randall Cobb is out, this guy slides right into the slot. Scantling is 6'5", 207. So he played the most snaps of all Green Bay wide receivers last week, and that's because Allison was hurt, Cobb was hurt. The week before that, I think he played something like 43% of the snaps. So it's on the uptick, which is great. But unless one or both of those guys are out, he's still your number 4 option, and then you still have Jimmy Graham. So if one of those guys is out of the lineup, feel free to roll him in. If not, we're going to kind of hold off maybe till next year.
Jim, what's your thoughts?
Well, I do think Cobb's not going to be back this week at the very least. It looks like he's going to miss at least another game, maybe 2. Right now we haven't gotten any updates on Allison. At least I haven't seen any. I was trying to look for some before the game. Nothing out there that I could find on whether or not, he's gotten any more looks. I know he hasn't cleared the concussion protocol yet, but we still have plenty of time for that. At least till Friday. Saturday might be pushing it. If they clear him on Saturday, he still might have a shot to play. But if they clear him Friday, then he should be good to go. And if he's out there, then I'm not really liking Valdez Scantling as much. But if both of these guys again don't play, then he absolutely has to be in your lineup. He was in my DFS lineups last week and paid off well for me.
I got to tell you, just to get in with the DFS again, if you're playing the whole weekend, I love Tom Brady, and then I just took him out of my lineup actually today for Aaron Rodgers against that San Francisco secondary. No matter who the wide receivers are, this guy's amazing, Jim Day. It doesn't matter who the wideouts are for him or Tom Brady. They just throw 400 yards. It doesn't matter.
No, I absolutely agree with you. That's why they're, two of the best in the league. But I will give you a stat that, I find kind of interesting. And one of the reasons why I don't really trust stats all that much. But over the last 3 weeks, Tom Brady has scored as many fantasy points as, wait for it, Eli Manning.
Yeah, baby. Eli. Now, Eli got robbed, Brian, by an Odell Beckham pass. That didn't seem right.
Well, I don't like the Giants either way, so I was kind of, whatever. Hey, Eli made up for a boneheaded play in that game where he was returning a punt and for some reason felt the need to go over and try to block somebody.
Not Eli, OBJ, you mean.
Oh, yeah, Beckham we're talking about. And, just made a terrible play. And, God, this guy, it's just you take one step forward, you take 2 steps back, and then after the game with the drama and all this, God bless you, Giants fans, putting up with this guy for more and more years. What a headache.
Well, for all the people out there,
who do you like again?
The world champion Philadelphia Eagles.
Oh boy,
okay. There you go.
They're feeling the hangover of winning a Super Bowl. Hey, no Jim. Question. Beckham is interesting because the most interesting part of his little tirade is no one on the Giants had a problem with it because no one saw the interview because they're so used to him going off, they don't even care.
Yeah. Not only that, he set up the interview on his own. He didn't even go through the team for that. So the team didn't even really know it was happening until it happened. I don't know. The fact that he had to do the interview with Lil Wayne beside him just spoke wonders.
Maybe we can get him on here next week.
Lil Wayne, I don't want Lil Wayne on here. I think he's useless. I'm not a big rap fan, but I'm definitely not a Lil Wayne fan. But it was just, I don't know. I don't know why you do something like that. He started looking like he was maturing a little bit, and then he just threw it all away with that interview.
It was funny.
Brian,
go ahead.
I learned something. That Jim Day is not a Lil Wayne fan, and neither are the women listeners. They don't like a Lil Wayne.
Well, hey, here's a question for you guys. Before last week, when Beckham threw a score and caught one, nobody was talking about how poor of a season he was having. Everyone kept focusing on Julio Jones, who has incredible numbers, except for the fact that he just isn't scoring touchdowns. Yeah. It surprised me because Beckham's in the biggest media market and everyone expects him to be, guns blazing, but nobody talked about the really slow start that OBJ has had.
Because they blamed it on Eli and the offensive line. They weren't blaming it on OBJ.
Well, it's the same thing.
I'll tell you what, I look at it like this, though, with Odell Beckham. I think he's a guy that it goes off every couple games, and he's going to put up 35 fantasy points. And at season's end, you're going to get the same numbers you expected to get from him as long as he stays healthy. But we're not going to have consistency. Like, he's not going to put up 18 points every week. We're going to get a 35 and a 6. A 35, a 4, and that's how I view Odell Beckham.
I don't think we're going to see too many of those 6s and 4s. I think his floor is a little better than that, and especially since they made the change. And finally, they gave me the greatest anniversary present on the planet this week when they finally let Eric Flowers walk. That was my 25th anniversary was Tuesday, and that's when they let him walk on Tuesday. Best present I've ever had for an anniversary ever. Sorry, wife, but it really was. The offensive line has been playing a little better the last couple of weeks. There's some life to this offense. I love the trick play with the Odell to Barkley pass. I like that kind of stuff. I want to see innovation. and you have the players around it to do it. If you don't trust Eli to do it all the time, let some other guys do it. Maybe we have a quarterback controversy in New York.
You never know if we do. Now, the San Francisco 49ers are hurting at running back. Can Kyle Juszczyk be a guy in PPR leagues that we're going to be using, Jim Day, for fantasy owners?
Yeah, I like him. Look, let's face it, with Frida out, Alfred Morris really not a threat to catch a lot of passes. And the one thing we do know about Beathard is he likes to throw checkdowns, and that's going to play right into Juszczyk's hands. He's a good pass-catching fullback, and I think we see a few more weeks, and at least till Breida comes back, of him putting up these solid numbers in PPR leagues. He's not going to run for anything, but if he can get 5-6 catches a game and get you to that 10, 11-point threshold, it really comes in handy in these bye weeks that are coming up. So, yeah, absolutely. He's a guy I think you should absolutely go out and get.
In the Fighting Chance Fantasy League, Jim, that I believe you might be in that also, I actually picked up Juszczyk this week, and I'm starting him because Mark Ingram is on bye. If you look at what he did last week, he played 70% of the snaps.
Yep.
That's incredible. Any running back who's doing that, you want in your lineup. So full point PPR, I think he's a guy you can absolutely put in as a flex or bye week fill-in if you need to. Standard leagues, I wouldn't touch the guy.
What's your thoughts on Alfred Morris, who was on some waiver wires and, of course, picked up, and people are going to be throwing him in the lineup? Jim, what are your expectations?
He's going to get more opportunity just because they're at a point where they don't really have a choice. But I'm not big on Morris. I just don't know if I could trust him doing much of anything. He's going to need to get in the end zone to really be a play in this game. And, I'm just not sure I see him doing that against Green Bay in Green Bay.
Yeah, I'm an Alfred Morris mark, I have to admit, which is tough. I've had him on teams for years, and I have him on a couple of teams currently. And do you know Alfred Morris tied his career high with 3 receptions last week?
I was just going to get that. I was just going to say that. Brian, what's your thoughts on the pass catching Alfred Morris?
Hey, if in this day and age in fantasy football, any running back with a pulse, if you can get him in your lineup and he's going to catch a couple passes and he's going to get the amount of attempts that Morris got, he ran the ball 18 times last week, which is incredible. So if you can get anybody close to that, you want him in your lineup. So Alfred Morris, if you could bet a few bucks on your fab budget, get his ass in your lineup.
Hey, Tony, before we go on to the next fact or fiction, we got a couple of questions in the chat room, so I'd like to get into them if you don't mind. Miley Robert.
I'm excited.
Miley Robert wants to know, in a standard league, would you go Ebron this week or Cameron Brate now that Winston is back?
I'll tell you what, I'm getting sucked into the Cameron Brate situation with the change in quarterback, going back to the old quarterback. I think they go back to Cameron Brate. I don't feel good about it, but I'm going Cameron Brate.
Ooh, how about you, Brian?
I saw O.J. Howard got some limited work in today for Tampa Bay. So if he comes back in, that could muddy the situation more. But to me, Ebron is, I think, the number 3 tight end in fantasy football right now. And I'm going to keep going to the well with him because all the guy does is get end zone targets. So those are the tight ends you want. It's such a dead position right now. If you give me any guy who's getting the ball in the end zone.
You know what's crazy about that?
Go ahead, Bill.
Is that, Brian, you bring up a good point, but I hate going on touchdown dependencies, but I look at it at the tight end position. That's all we got outside of the top 3 tight ends, right? Is if they don't get anyone in the top 10 gets in the end zone, and that's the only way to get in there. So I guess you can go and you can feel good about Ebron, but I just hate the number of targets that he gets.
Well, I mean, you look, there's nobody else in that offense now. T.Y. Hilton's going to be out for a few weeks. Chester Rogers and Doyle's still out for a couple of weeks. He's going to be the man there. He's basically their de facto wide receiver 1.
Well, to argue that point, it actually was a hand. He got handed that second touchdown. That second touchdown should have went to Eric Swoop.
Oh my God, what a gift!
Yeah, right. So he got it. I mean, he still would have had a good stat line. 8 for 108 yards and a touchdown. Not definitely one of the better tight end weeks of this season so far because tight ends have been so terrible. But yeah, I mean that second one was absolutely a gift. But still, I am going with Ebron. Winston's first game back, we knew he liked Brait last week. Howard, if Howard does play, definitely muddies the water a little bit too much for me. I'm going to stay with Ebron, even in the standard league. But then, Jason wants to know, he's going to make it even tougher. If Greg Olson plays, would you play Brait or Greg Olson? And start with you there, Brian. What's your thoughts there?
I see. Here's the deal. I can't put Greg Olson in a lineup right now with that foot injury. Seeing him come into a game and then possibly leave early by re-aggravating it, and then you're really screwed. I want to see him get a game. I want to see him get practices in where I know he's good to go and he's not going to leave me with 2 points and staring at a loss in a fantasy game. So I can't feel confident putting Greg Olson in yet.
How about you, Tony?
Yeah, I feel the same way. And then I'm going to fire a question at you guys. I will not play Greg Olson. I would sit and watch. What do you do with the 2 Rams wide receivers, Jim? It's reported today that the coach believes that Cooper Kupp will play and Brandon Cooks will play. Do you put them both in your lineup this week?
Well, from what I saw, look, the one to Cooks looked like it was much worse.
Yeah.
That headshot was just deadly. So at this point, I'm not sure I would start Cooks this week, even if he plays. It just scares me. He's had 2 in the last year now. Definitely, it just scares me a little bit more. Kups wasn't as bad. He didn't really show the signs of it. So I think, he's a safer play coming into this week, but Cooks scares me.
2 in the last 8 months for Brandon Cooks. You remember the shot he took in the Super Bowl?
Yeah, I was trying to figure out how long, but I knew it was in the last year.
Cooper Kupp is so good. Oh my goodness. If he's playing, you got to have him in your lineup. It's unbelievable what that guy's doing.
Let me ask you how good he is, though, because I seen this guy named Reynolds not play a snap come in and look like he'd be in the Pro Bowl, too.
Well, hey, if you're starting and you're in the Sean McVay offense and Jared Goff likes you, it sounded kind of like when Eric Decker was in Denver. Anywhere else he went, he was kind of hot garbage. But in Denver that year or two with Peyton Manning, he was an all-pro. And that's kind of what Cooper Kupp is right now.
The Great White Hope.
I didn't say that. Okay, so anyway, a couple of guys are talking about Jameis Winston. Would you play Jameis Winston over Wilson, over Russell Wilson this week? And we already know Tony's answer, Brian, so I'll go to you. Would you play Winston in this great matchup against Atlanta over Russell Wilson?
See, this is one of those things where every sign points to yes. He's playing against a terrible Atlanta secondary, and this is the play that everybody in DFS talks. So they go, oh, yeah, this is, easy money. He's going to throw for 400 yards and 3 touchdowns, and then you're going to all of a sudden see him go out and throw 4 picks, throws for $175, and Russell Wilson becomes Russell Wilson again and throws for 300 and runs 2 in. So, I mean, on the surface, yeah, you probably should play Jameis Winston, but it's not like Russell Wilson's chopped liver. He's still throwing a ball all over the place.
Well, not all over the place. He didn't even hit 200 yards passing last week.
Well, I still think he's good with the emergence of guys like David Moore, who we'll talk about, and Tyler Lockett seems to always get deep. There's always an option there with those guys, even though they're running the ball better. Winston scares me with the amount he turns the ball over.
Well, unless you play in a league where you get the negative points. I mean, some leagues don't have that, so you don't have to worry about that. Look, with Wilson, the thing that kills me about Wilson is this new offense doesn't allow him to run the ball. At least with a quarterback like this, behind that O-line, you always could count on Russell Wilson to get you a nice floor just by running the ball. And he's not doing that now. They're not allowing him to run as much. They're trying to keep him in the pocket, trying to throw the ball downfield. And they just don't have a ton of weapons to do that consistently. So that really scares me this week. This might be a week that I'm tempted to go Winston. And I'm not a big Winston fan, but I do love this matchup.
It's hard not to love the matchup. That's why I said no, because everybody's going to be tempted, right? We had a 58 total in that game. But Russell Wilson's got the Oakland Raiders. I mean, that's a little, this is some saliva dripping from your chin on that one, too.
Only on your chin. That's only because you just ate dinner. But yeah, no, I get it. I really do. I just wish they'd allow him to run.
Yeah, we were going to get to before we get to another question, we're talking about Seattle in the wide receivers. Jim, I was actually listening to your show Sunday morning, and you guys, the King, Scotty Engel, was saying how he didn't like Doug Baldwin. And I actually listened to the King, which is usually a recipe for disaster. And I used Tyler Lockett in that game, and he paid off big for me because the King was so in on how Doug Baldwin is not healthy. And he can't be healthy, Jim, after watching that game because everybody got off. And what do you think of Seattle's wide receivers going forward?
Well, Lockett seems to be the guy right now. If Baldwin can't get it done, but they're already saying Baldwin's practicing fully. He's okay, as good as he's going to get. I wouldn't be surprised at all if this is a week where we see them get him highly involved. Last week, they used him more as a decoy just to set it up, get him on the field, do some routes. I wouldn't be surprised after all the talk going on this week that they get the ball more in his hands. But Lockett is a guy I definitely feel much safer for.
I'll tell you what, Brian, if they get 2 targets to Doug Baldwin, that'll improve by 100%.
Well, you talk about a guy like David Moore, who we were going to mention here. Is he a sustainable play for fantasy? And I don't think he is, because the last 2 weeks he's gotten 2 and 4 targets. And just for the simple fact that Doug Baldwin's on the field, he's going to be taking up space and targets from a guy like David Moore. So in a team that's not throwing the ball as much as they should, I don't see them really involving Moore as much. And if you look at a stat I had about their running game, over the next 7 weeks, their opponents average the 24th ranked rush defense in the NFL. So Chris Carson and Mike Davis could really go off over the course of the next 2 months.
And that's another.
They look good against the Rams.
Wilson, though.
They look good against the Rams, Jim. Jim, can you use both those Seattle running backs?
Ooh, I think you could try, but you definitely there's going to be weeks where you're going to miss out on one and not the other. It really comes down to who you have on your team. But I think both of these guys are going to be involved enough because they're running so much and trying to establish such a heavy rush offense that I think both of these guys are going to get plenty of opportunity. And I want to see if Davis becomes that guy who steals all those touchdowns from Carson, because then at that point Carson really relies heavily on going over the 100-yard mark every week to get you double digits.
Can we remind everyone that they spent a first-round draft pick on a running back, and we just didn't even talk about him?
Well, that running back only played 1 snap last week, and that was on special teams. Why talk about him?
Unbelievable.
He did it to himself. He came into camp 16 pounds overweight and then had a lousy preseason. He did it to himself. He can't blame anybody but himself. And you know what? I think he got through the combine, thought, all the hard work was done. He had it made. He was first-round pick, walking into Seattle where he should easily take over the job, and he just let it get to his head.
All right, I'm going to ask you guys a crazy question. It's going to seem crazy. Do you think to be good at fantasy football, Jim, that you actually have to watch football?
I personally think you do. But there's a lot of people out there that are pretty successful at DFS that probably never watch a damn game. All they watch is the stats. Put them in their spreadsheets, run their algorithms, and they're good to go. Probably never watch a game on a Sunday at all. So, it's hard to say. I think in season long, absolutely, you got to watch the games. If you're playing DFS, the guys winning the big money are usually the mathletes out there that have everything in their spreadsheets.
It's funny. I can give you an anecdotal story about this. In my home league that I've been running for well over a decade, I've got a guy in my league, Jim Hartman. I'll give a shout out to our proud veteran, Mr. Hartman there. He's finished in 3rd place in this league twice in the last 2 years, and he's won the league twice. And, I talked to him about the games and all this.
He's coming 3rd in the league twice.
He's won the league twice.
And won the league twice in the last 2 years?
He's won the league twice a few years back, and he's come in 3rd the last 2 years. And we're talking football before the draft and all this. And then he lays up and he goes, "Oh, I don't have cable." He goes, I don't even watch the games. Like, what? You don't watch the games? How do you do any of this? He's like, I just read some articles and, see what's going on and just make moves. And this astonished me. So as a guy whose, team is awful in that same exact league. You totally don't need to watch the games. There's so much information and sites like Fighting Chance Fantasy and listening to the Frenzy and the different shows out there. You can totally get by without watching the games.
I'll tell you what, the reason I asked that question is I watched those two Seattle running backs, right? And I'll tell you what, they both ran hard. They both looked good against a very good Rams defense. And you know what? The bottom line is those stat guys just sit there, number of carries, how many yards per carry, how's that team against the run? And it's almost, there's no bias because you don't fall in love with the player. And I, from being involved in DFS for a long time, I've met all those guys that do well, that don't play there. And Jim, I think it takes out the biases and the rooting interest because we all have a team, a favorite team. You're the Giants. We have the Eagles, and I have the Patriots. And we always say, you know what? We put our fantasy teams first, or some of us say, and some don't. But there's still biases involved. And I think those guys, you know what? I think they do have an advantage not watching the games.
Take a look at what happened last week with Kenyon Drake. Everyone thought he was dead. He comes out at the end of the game, gets a bunch of garbage time catches. Laramie Tunsil goes down, so their running game's even worse. But if you look at the stat line, it goes, oh, wow, Kenyon Drake's back. Yeah, I can safely plug him back into my lineup. But if you watch the game, like you said, you realize, there's some big-time issues in Miami.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Look, I look at it this way. Most of those guys, they do that for a business. They do it for, they're not trying to have fun. We're trying to have fun. This is a hobby to us, and we're trying to have fun. Look, I've been doing a lot better at DFS, but I'm not out there winning $1 million. So it is what it is. But, this is the first year I've ever won anything in DFS. I always thought before that when I played DFS, my season-long knowledge would carry me, and it's just a totally different game.
Talking about a totally different game, the Philadelphia Eagles are in need of a running back in 2018. Last year, they used a few of them to get themselves to the Super Bowl. And now the Buffalo Bills, LaShawn McCoy, could he be a guy on the move? And this is an interesting question because people forget the Bills were a playoff team last year. And the Bills have been competitive since the change of quarterback. Do they go and move a running back and cash in this year, Jim?
I think they do. Look, they're not going anywhere this year. They're not going to be a playoff team. They know that. And I'm pretty sure they're pretty safe in that assumption. He doesn't really do much for him. He's got a big contract. He's not been playing well for them. He's been injured and not getting a lot of chances. At this point, why not try and get something for him? The last I heard, they're trying to get a second-round pick for him. I don't know if they get a second for a 30-year-old running back at this point, but, maybe a third. And I think that's a good move for Philadelphia. I think McCoy would be well, but you got to remember there's hard feelings here. McCoy was very pissed when Philadelphia traded him away last time. So I'd be interested if McCoy is even sitting there saying, "Are you kidding me? You think I want to go back to that freaking asshole organization? That ain't happening." Brian,
what's your thought?
Man, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this.
Sure. And obviously the name that comes up is LaShawn McCoy, and people said, hey, why don't we get Le'Veon Bell? I think there's better options out there for Philadelphia that they could get much cheaper, namely being Tevin Coleman or Kenyon Drake. I think they could get, and especially guys coming on the end of rookie contracts like Kenyon Drake, which is a really smart move. Instead of paying millions and millions of dollars to a guy like McCoy, it's laughable to say we're going to get a second or third round pick for LaShawn McCoy. Get the hell out of here. You're not going to get a fifth for LaShawn McCoy. And they know it. There's no chance in hell Philly's going to, with all the needs that they're going to have in the offseason and how pressed they are against the cap, give up a valuable draft pick like that for LaShawn McCoy. It's not happening. But I do think they're going to make a move. It's going to be maybe a lesser known guy. Maybe even like a Bilal Powell. I think Bilal Powell could come in there and really help that offense and just kind of be, another one of the three heads in the three-headed monster backfield.
Well, which might even be four heads when Darren Sproles is available to come back.
It's funny that Peterson actually, the first name he mentioned when he talked about what to do with this backfield, the first name he mentioned was Darren Sproles and getting him healthy. I just don't think for fantasy, Darren Sproles is going to provide you with anything because he's never going to top more than 50 yards in either category.
I'll tell you what, though, one thing that the Jets, Isaiah Crowell did not practice. He's dealing with an ankle injury. Jim, are they going to ever give this guy the ball double-digit times, or is he just going to be a home run hitter the rest of the season?
Well, he got double-digit carries last week, 15, put up over 200 yards in that game. Yeah,
now he's got a bad ankle.
Yeah, now he's got the bad ankle. Yeah, if you look at his numbers, like we look at Amari Cooper's numbers, and he does well on the even weeks and does poorly on the odd weeks. If you look at Crowell, it's the exact opposite. He does well on the odd weeks, does poorly on the even weeks. Some of these guys, it doesn't make any sense or logic in any way, shape, or form, but you could watch it happen week after week after week and follow those trends, and they just seem to hit for some reason. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but it does happen.
Brian?
Sticking in that same game, in that same backfield that we're talking about, Bilal Powell, everyone looks at what Crowell did with his 15 rushes for 219 yards. He was outsnapped, and Bilal Powell had more rushing attempts. He had 5 more rushing attempts, and he ran for 99 yards himself. So I think that was just an anomaly game where just everything clicked right for a team. The team itself rushes for, 323 yards. That's insane. That never happens. So I think that's just a fluke game, and Isaiah Crowell is going to turn into a pumpkin at midnight again, and you're never going to want him in your lineup.
I think he'll have a couple more games like that. Well, not like that, but good enough to be in your lineup over the course of the season. Just not somebody you absolutely can count on every week.
That's a sell-high guy.
He is a sell-high guy. He's absolutely. He's going to be top on my list when we talk about sell-high. So, let's get into it. He's definitely a guy I would sell high right now, coming off this great big game. People are going to be all over him. Same with, you mentioned it before, Kenyon Drake. Another guy, if somebody's out there willing to pay something for Drake, anything at all, I would let them pay it and take whatever you can get for him.
All right, I'll give you my sell high guy. I'm going to jump in. I'm going to feel the peer pressure. It's got to me. I'm selling high on Tevin Coleman. Devonta Freeman, I think, is going to miss the game again this week. You got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. People are going to light up. Ito Smith is killing it on those goal line carries. He's going to get more and more work. People fall in love with the next guy all the time. And Tevin Coleman has been a guy that's been loved by fantasy owners for a long time. I'm making the move before the game against the Buccaneers and getting someone good in return.
Yeah, but you might be a couple of weeks too late because, a couple of weeks ago, it would have been a great sell high. Then he's had 2 bad weeks in a row. I hear you that Freeman, they're saying Freeman might not play, but, this is only Wednesday. I'm not taking a Wednesday report yet. There's too many times a lot of these guys just don't practice on Wednesdays just to get the day off to relax and, heal a little bit. So I want to see what happens tomorrow or Friday before I'm ready to say he's not going to play this week. But, yeah, I get what you're saying. I just don't know if you get a lot out of Tevin Coleman at this point.
I'm using the Buccaneers game, Jim. I'm using the Buccaneers game to sell it in the 58 total. What do you got, Brian?
You, Brian? Yeah.
I actually got quite a few guys here on the buy and sell list. This is something that interests me. I'm a guy who likes to trade a lot in my leagues. So somebody I'm looking to sell high on, and it's unfortunate because I was all over him in the preseason, and that's Dalvin Cook. Every magazine, every website out there in the past 2 weeks that you've ever read any trade for article, they're all saying, go get Dalvin Cook. Go get Dalvin Cook. I'm saying the other thing, sell Dalvin Cook. I don't think he plays this week. They're on bye next week. They're losing linemen left and right. And if you ever watched a Minnesota Vikings game, they can't run the ball at all. So if I can still kind of perceive some of that first, second round value for Dalvin Cook and get a piece or two for him, I think now is the time to strike. Just get him out before people realize, like, oh my God, this Minnesota team can't run the ball for anything.
You're selling low. I'm not a big fan of selling low.
I don't know if it's selling low necessarily because people think, well, he's coming back. He hasn't done much, but he still has the big time name. He's shrouded in mystery, if we could say.
I'm pretty sure he got in a full practice today. I'm not. I like Cook. I do. Tony talks about the bias. There's the bias. I like Cook. I still expect him to bounce back this year at some point, but I'm just not. I still think you're selling low on him now because he was not a perceived first round value. He was drafted a lot in the first round.
Oh, trust me, I did it twice.
Yeah. So
he was. For everyone out there, he was a limited participant in the practice today. I'll tell you what, I'm one of the few people that didn't jump all over the Dalvin Cook situation. And it's interesting because the reason he fell to Minnesota, I believe, in the draft in the second round was that he was always hurt at Florida State. And they went through the physicals, come up during the physicals. And Jim, I think some people can make it through 16 games and other people's bodies don't. And I think this guy's going to continually break down. And if I'm a dynasty owner, I wouldn't hang on to this guy if you find one of those people that love Dalvin Cook.
Okay, I'll give you a couple of quick analogies to that. If you go back and look at Fred Taylor's start to his career, the first few years he was hurt all the time. Couldn't even get on the field.
Fragile Fred.
Right, exactly. Fragile Fred. Couldn't get on the field, couldn't do anything. And then all of a sudden the health kicked in and he went years without getting really injured enough to miss games and put up great fantasy numbers. Take another one, Gronk. When Gronk came into the league, everybody thought he would last a year or two because he had a bad back coming into the league. Nobody thought he'd be able to put up to it. Now he's had some injuries over the year, but he's also been one of the greatest tight ends to ever play the game. And he's done it for quite a few years now. So, sometimes it's really hard to tell if somebody who's had that early start to injuries is somebody that, is going to constantly be injured going forward all the time. It may happen, it may not. I'll give you one other, though, that we're talking about this right now, and there might be legitimate concern with, and that's Fournette in Jacksonville.
Yeah.
He went out yesterday and signed Jamal Charles, who last year didn't do much in Denver. He averaged 4 yards a carry, but he had nothing else really to his name that said anything. Only had one touchdown. Didn't really get to play much in 14 games. So, there's concern there that because they went out and did that maybe they're not expecting Fournette back anytime soon and maybe not the rest of the year. So I'd like to get your guys' thoughts on that. What do you think that the signing of Jamal Charles is actually saying here?
Well, I think they're going to keep him out through the Week 10 bye, and it just screams TJ Yeldon is the man there. And it kind of lends to another guy I had on our buy low list, and that's Blake Bortles. I think Blake Bortles right now, who's only a few points behind Tom Brady in terms of fantasy points on the year, is going to be throwing a ball all over the yard. So if they're bringing in a back, and let's say what it is, he can go out and catch the pass. So I think that Jacksonville offense is just telling you what they want to do. They're going to throw the ball. That's going to be their identity going forward. If you look at kind of what they did this past week, they were in they ran 13 red zone plays this past week. 11 of them were passes. Now, I'm not saying they had a great outing against Kansas City, but Nathaniel Hackett and Doug Marrone are showing you their hand. This is what they're going to be without Leonard Fournette. They don't think that Yeldon can be that bell cow. So, I think buy on Yeldon. I don't buy on Jamal Charles, and buy on Blake Bortles.
For everybody out there in the fantasy world, so what happened this week is Corey Grant hit the injured reserve, and of course Leonard Fournette's out. So the Jaguars signed Jamal Charles and Dave Williams off the Broncos practice squad. I got to ask you, Jim, is Jamal Charles worth a pickup?
Man, that's a tough choice. But being the fact that there's so many, running backs not getting it done, if you have bench spot for him, I think he is. Is he the same Jamal Charles that, once ruled this league? Absolutely not. But if he gets his opportunity in this team, if something were to happen to Yeldon, who has looked really well the last two weeks, if something happens to him, then he might have to be their guy going forward. Even with Bortles throwing a lot, you still got to run sometimes. We've seen teams try to throw the ball continuously every game before, and it works for a little while and then it doesn't. So, I think he's worth a little bit, but there's definitely risk involved. And whether or not he's the same player, I definitely don't think he is.
Brian, I'll ask you the question then. If Blake Bortles is going to be the superstar that you believe in, who's the wide receiver that's going to step up in Jacksonville?
Well, I don't think Blake Bortles is a superstar. I think he's just going to be a compiler.
Fantasy superstar. Superstar.
Yeah, you can't watch the games; they're terrible. But somehow he'll get it done.
Time points, baby.
Yeah, he ran one in. He had a late. Everything about Blake Bortles' game is ugly. Don't watch. It is terrible. I don't really know if there is one guy out there. If it's Dante Moncrief, if it's Keelan Cole, if it's Who's the other guy now? The D.D. Westbrook? I don't think it matters. I think they're just going to throw to everybody.
Well, wait, let me interject here. First of all, Moncrief has quietly had 3 of the last 4 weeks double-digit scores. Been the most consistent out of all 3. And if you really believe in stats like air yards, his air yards are over 100 more than Cole and over 130 more than Westbrook in those games. So, he's getting the opportunity more down the field. And so far, he's been the most consistent. So if I'm going to pick one, it's going to be Moncrief.
I love that I got you to quote an air yard stat.
Yeah, I know. It's the only one you'll ever get from me either. We talked about that on the Frenzy today. I got Corey into a rant about air yards. He went and looked up the actual definition of what air yards are. And I got to tell you, I'm going to go back to my original. I don't think it's useful at all in fantasy football.
But yeah, talking about those Jags receivers, I think it's a crapshoot. If you want to say Moncrief or whatever, none of them are going to be your wide receiver 1 or 2. That you're looking at a flex play, desperation wide receiver 3.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm not talking about guys who must starts every week, but again, those guys that double-digit points. That's what I'm looking for a wide receiver 3 or a flex wide receiver. I want to know I have a decent floor of double-digit points, and quietly there's been a couple guys that fit that mold. Ryan Grant is another one. You don't like him. He doesn't have he doesn't have upside, but 4 out of 5 games this year he's had double-digit scores because he gets used. And as long as that continues, and that was even with Hilton on the field or not on the field. So right now, Ryan Grant is like one of my top pickups of the week. If he's still out there, you're going to get consistent double-digit points for him in almost every week. So he's definitely a guy I would stash on the bench for those heavy bye weeks coming up.
I'll tell you what, the bye weeks are coming up. We had the 2 Chicago Bears. The Bears are favored in the game. We talked about New England and Kansas City. The Bears are playing in Miami, and the Bears are favored, Jim. How about that one?
Yeah, favored by 3, too. It does have a low over-under, though. Last I saw was 41.5. So, they're definitely looking for a low-scoring game here. And I think that's absolutely going to come to fruition. Miami, whatever you want to say, they've only given up 6 passing touchdowns through 5 weeks and taken 10 interceptions. So their defense is playing well. They're getting it done on that side of the ball, at least in the passing game. The running game, you can run on them all game. So I think Jordan Howard is actually going to be a great play this week. After the last game when he was just totally useless, he's going to be so low owned this week, even going into this Miami defense that has allowed the 29th most fantasy points in the PPR league to running backs. And Howard, while not known as a pass catching back, was early in the season catching 3-4 passes a game. I love that from a guy who I think can ground out 100 yards, get you in the end zone once, and which I think is what he can do this week. So I love Howard this week.
Let me ask you guys a question about roster construction in bye weeks. Somebody like Jordan Howard, to me, seems like a great trade for candidate because maybe his owner forgot about him. He was on a bye. He had a bad game before that. So maybe someone you can sneak in there and steal while he's undervalued. What do you feel about buying guys who are on trade? Like Kenny Galladay's on bye. Kenny Galladay's on bye this week, right? And so are any of the Saints, like Mark Ingram or outside of Ingram in his huge game. Do you think going after a guy on bye is a smart buying opportunity?
I think it's a great move if you play in leagues where they're not listening to a podcast on Wednesday night and learning football, because I think people will panic and I think people will make a move for the 1 week. I don't think you get the guy that plays for 20 years is in 8 leagues to make that move, but it only takes 1. And I think if you play in a league where people have a job and they have kids and they have a wife and they just play this for fun, I think absolutely you can steal one of those players.
And I'm right there with you. He's definitely on my buy low list right now. Like you said, coming off the bad game, coming off the buy. I love using the buy that way. I like picking up guys on waivers that are on buy, that people, either they dropped because they were on buy, they needed somebody else, or just have been sitting there on buy and they got a buy coming up. I love grabbing them early when I think they can help me going forward. So, yeah, you absolutely have to use that bye week to your advantage.
It makes a difference when you're trying to trade in your season-long leagues, because you'll have owners who are going to start saying like, well, I held this guy through his bye and the guy you're trading me still has his coming up. So there's always a little trepidation with owners and bye weeks out there. When you're at your draft, you never really think about like, I'll worry about that 10 weeks from now. But it actually matters now that we're in the thick of it.
Everybody's got a little thing that they got going on. Speaking about little things going on,
you can go talking about my little thing.
You can go to Facebook and go to Fantasy Football Talk and get Jim Day and the whole group there. Jim gets a little fired up today, though, over at Fantasy Football Talk. We got a question there, Jim. Jalen Rashad or Donta Foreman for a deep stash at running back in PPR leagues? That's from Josh Solinger.
Look, I'm buying into Donta Foreman. I've picked him up in quite a few leagues. Look, they've got no running game going on right now. They've been using Kiki Kute the last 2 weeks as basically a short running game through the pass. And I absolutely expect them to give Donta Foreman every chance. They say he's fully healthy. He's had almost a year to recover from the torn Achilles. So he should be good to go from what they're saying. And they expect him to be back and ready to go in week 7. I think week 7 would be tough to start him in, but I think moving past that, I think he gives them a shot at a running game that they just haven't had all year.
I agree with you. Brian?
I've had Donta Foreman stashed mainly for the fact that he has a hyphen in his name, or an apostrophe in his name. Any of those guys, they've got to be good. So I've had him stashed for a while. And yeah, I mean, that's what fantasy football is all about. You're trying to be smarter than your friends. And if you can hit a home run on this guy, you'll sit there for the next 10 years at a bar going, remember when I stashed Donta Foreman and he hit, and all you sons of bitches didn't know about him and all. And that's what it's about. You'll talk about it forever. You could come in 12th place in the league, but you hit on Donta Foreman.
I'll give you a perfect example of that. And this was my best fantasy year ever was in 2010. Coming into the season, I love Gronk coming out. Everybody else was on Hernandez. I love Gronk. I will always love Gronk. I love those big, tough tight ends that fight for everything and just go out there and just mean. I love that. Always did. That's why I was a Shockey fan. I love tight ends that play that way. So I was on Gronk that year when everybody else was going to Hernandez. And then I was on Arian Foster when everybody else didn't believe he could do it. And that year just rolled. I had them in pretty much all my leagues. And those two guys just won me so many leagues that year. It wasn't even funny. I won over 50% championships that season based on those two guys.
I mean,
so yeah, I'm still talking about it.
Thank God he didn't use the Aaron Hernandez. He was a slasher coming out of college. At least you didn't use that, Jim. All right. So congratulations. Hey, I thought this was a stupid question. Now the more and more I think about it, it could still be a stupid question, but I'm not sure. This is a Dynasty League question. This is from Andy Wolf. Should I trade Odell Beckham Jr. and Kerryon Johnson for Kareem Hunt or David Johnson? The reason why I thought it was stupid is like you're trading a first-round pick and you're throwing in Kerryon Johnson for two guys that are debatable first-round picks, right? But I'm looking at running backs are hard to come by. You're playing a dynasty league, so I understand what he's trying to do here a little bit, Jim, but I don't think I could do this.
I know I couldn't do it. Look, like you said, you're giving a first rounder for a first rounder, and then you're throwing in a very good young running back. Who, right now he's in a committee, and they still have LeGarrette Blount, who's going to steal goal line touches. I get it, but that's not going to be Kerryon Johnson's game. When he scores, he's going to score from outside the 5, and I expect those times to come. I like Kerryon Johnson a lot. I love the way he runs. I love the moves he has. He always seems to have his eyes downfield looking. Just things I really like to look for in a running back. So, yeah, I'm with you. I wouldn't give up such a great wide receiver and what I think is a good young running back. He's not there yet, but this is a dynasty league, and you have to picture out 2-3 years.
There's no what are you adding on to Odell Beckham for? In a trade, exactly. Odell Beckham straight up is worth any of those guys, especially in a dynasty league. He's still young.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's way too much on my mind for me.
That's why. Sorry, Andy, for calling you a jackass, but we love you. There, we love you just the same. I
didn't hear anybody call him a jackass till just now.
I was just saying what other people were thinking. I said that out loud. I didn't mean to say that out loud, Andy. We love you.
Jim's gonna kick you out of the group. You got to watch out, Tony.
Hey, we went over 2,000 members today.
That's amazing.
All right, Jim.
Yeah,
I'll tell you what, Jim.
Nuts.
It's crazy, and I'll tell you what. There's great questions every day in there, and I'll say I just go and I read. It's a lot to keep me quiet. I just read, and I'm impressed. Every question you can have is in there.
Yeah, pretty much covers the gamut. Some are a little on, what we would consider the ridiculous side from a lot of newbies and stuff. But that's why I wanted to start the group. I want everybody to be able to ask questions, whether it's a newbie or not. And, hopefully I can guide them into learning more about fantasy football as I answer their questions.
Something I like about the group is everyone out there who probably listens to this show is in 1-2 big leagues. That's what your focus is. That's the average fantasy player's fantasy life is. Oh, I got this one big league with all my buddies. So the opinions in that group and the values of players from just your group of friends kind of skews your fantasy mindset. So coming into this forum and seeing what other people think really helps. So, in your league, you might say like, oh my God, everybody overvalues the quarterback so much, where you come to our group and you go, well, really, the quarterback's not that important. You can pick up CJ Beathard off the waiver wire. So I enjoy what you're doing there, and you're giving a lot of perspective to people who might not get it from their group of friends.
Yeah, it's been.
Here we got a question from.
I'll tell you that.
We got a question from Cedric Wright, and we don't answer too many 2-quarterback leagues. And I love it. I'll tell you what, I'm in favor of 2-quarterback leagues. I have a decision you can help me with here. Deshaun Watson's going to start, but who do I play as my other quarterback? Sam Darnold or Mitchell Trubisky? 2 weeks ago, I would have laughed at Mitchell Trubisky, Jim, and now I can't believe
no N his name. It's not Trubisky. It's Trubisky. No N.
All right.
But you're not the only one. I hear so many people add that N to his name. But it's tough. You know what? I think I would go with Trubisky just because the weapons they had around him. I think this offense maybe gets a little, courage out of that game. I don't expect those kind of numbers ever again. They're not going to play Tampa Bay again. So I don't expect those numbers to be that high. But I just think I trust him a little bit more than Sam Darnold, especially now that Darnold looks to be, well, maybe not without, but with an injured, favorite receiver with Anunua, now that he has that brace on his hand. We saw the 2 passes that went his way clang right off his hands, something he never does. So that brace must be affecting his hands, or that hand is hurting more than they're letting on. So at that point, I know Robbie Anderson had the 2 long touchdowns, and I know they had a lot of big plays. In fact, this was the first time since 1972 that the Jets had 2 plays of more than 75 yards. You have to go back to 1972. Joe Namath, 2 passes to Rich Castor to go over that number. That's how long ago they did that. Probably be that long to do it again.
And that is crazy. Brian, here's a question from Michael Charles talking about questions of all levels. Will playing in London affect affect Cooks this week?
Well,
Jared Cook. It's Jared Cook. He wrote Cooks, and I'm thinking Jared Cook.
Unless he goes out and gets shit-faced on some at some London pub the night before. No, I mean he's killing it. He's getting a ton of targets, and he's really kind of the apple of Derek Carr's eye, and they found a niche for him there. So God bless him. If you got Jared Cook, if you picked him in the last round or off of the waiver wire, no, there's no reason to think he's going to have a down game.
Yeah, I don't. He's getting too many targets. He's too involved. You got to keep playing him again, just because there really aren't a lot of tight ends you can really count on this year.
I got 2 more questions, Jim. You ready? Real quick. Andy Dalton or Jameis Winston this week? We talked about Winston. Dalton's playing great, and they got wide receivers coming out of their ass. Jim, who do you got?
Yeah. I think I'm going to go with Dalton at home playing against Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, definitely one of the worst pass defenses in the league. 31st against quarterbacks, 29th against wide receivers, 31st against tight ends. I think this is definitely a game where you're going to play all hands on deck for Cincinnati. But at the same time, I got this little voice in the back of my head that says, you know what, there's too many times these games end up like 15-13.
Andy Dalton always struggles with Pittsburgh too, doesn't he? You know, he'll look great, and then they'll play a national TV game, and Dalton goes 13 of 38 for 100 yards and 11 interceptions. So Dalton scares the shit out of me.
He does me too.
He does too.
Winston scares the shit out of me too. I mean, I don't know. It really comes down.
But Andy's had 5 good games in a row. When's he had 6?
I'm saying Dalton. I agree with you.
Sneaky play in that game, Tyler Boyd, because Joe Hayden could be shadowing AJ Green.
Not sneaky anymore.
All right, well,
not sneaky.
If you, I don't know what his price is this week on DraftKings or anything, but
I haven't looked at that yet. I do that usually tomorrow morning, but
he's about, I think he's in the $5,000 to $6,000 range. I forget what it was, somewhere around there. Last question: would you trade Julio Jones for Mike Evans?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
You would rather have Mike Evans than Julio Jones?
I own Julio Jones in a number of leagues, and he's quietly killing me, like my wife and kids.
He's got almost 600 yards
and 0 touchdowns, and that matters.
Touchdowns, but you knew that going in. He only had 3 last year.
Well, but again, touchdowns matter. This is a game where you win by scoring more points than your opponent. So, I don't get really why you'd want to do the trade. You're kind of just saying, hey, take my wide receiver 1 for your wide receiver 1. So, I mean, if you want to do it, okay. They're both going to have big games. But if I have Julio Jones and I'm trying to trade him because I'm frustrated, and I'm speaking from experience, I want to get multiple really good options. Maybe you're not going to get A+ options that Julio is, but give me 2 really good players that can help my lineup. I mean, Mike Evans or him, it's just, you might as well just keep Julio then.
That's what I'm saying.
I mean, go get better players, multiple better players. You have them throw your running back, get James White and, like we said, Tyler Boyd, get those kind of guys. 2 good players.
So you would take Tyler Boyd and James White for Julio Jones?
You know what? If I'm in a full PPR and I need a running back help with what James White's doing, absolutely. I think he's a really good player, and Michelle already today showed up on the injury report with a knee. Brady said he wants him in the lineup. I think James White is a league-winning running back this year.
Yeah, but you know what? They're going to get to a point where everybody in fantasy is on James White, and Belichick is going to bench his ass.
Belichick's going to be like, you know what? I read on Fighting Chance Fantasy that it's a James White week, so F this guy. He's on the bench. Where's Brandon Bolden? Get Brandon Bolden in here.
I swear he listens to fantasy guys just so he can mess with them. I absolutely swear it.
WTF Fantasy Football, the fastest hour in sports, Jim. I don't know how it goes so quick.
It does go so quick. And I'm sitting here, I just happen to look up and see it's past 10 o'clock already. I mean, I could talk for another hour with you two. It's just too easy. But, yeah, thanks, everybody, for listening in on us this week. Give us a like. Give us a nudge. If you're listening on iTunes, make sure you give us a rating and a comment. We love it. Whatever you can do to help us out, we appreciate it. We just definitely love that you're listening in, and we hope we're helping you out at all. So, on behalf of Tony, on behalf of Brian, everybody, we're going to say good night. Good luck in week 6, and we will talk to you next Wednesday. Good night, everybody.